Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this Formations event, Social Activism in the Academic Space, in conversation with Dr. Asma Sayed. Tonight, Asma is joining us all the way from Canada. She is the Associate Vice President for Anti-Racism, Professor of English and Canada Research Chair in South Asian Literary and Cultural Studies at Kwantlen Polytechnic University, Canada. She specialises in post-colonial and diasporic literatures with a focus on narratives of exile and displacement in South Asia and East Africa. Her interdisciplinary research is informed by feminist and critical race studies and examines the marginalization of gendered and racialized people as represented in literature, film, and media. In her current projects, she explores the contributions of South Asian writers and filmmakers in Canada to the discourse of social justice. Her publications include 5 books and numerous articles in academic journals, anthologies, and periodicals. She was elected to the Royal Society of Canada's College of New Scholars, Artists and Scientists in 2020 and is the recipient of KPU's Justice, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Award for 2023 and Distinguished Scholarship Award for 2022. She has also been the past president of the Canadian Association for Postcolonial Studies. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Asma. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to see you again, Ramisha. I know I visited NTU in November, and I'm excited to be talking to the broader NTU community today. My experience when I visited was lovely, and I'm quite excited for this chat today.
That's great. That's good to know. We loved having you at NTU and, been very excited about tonight's event. So yeah, thank you again for joining us. A good place to start would be by asking if you could tell us more about KPU's anti-racism initiative.
So at KPU, we have a number of initiatives ongoing, and even with anti-racism, we do have many faculty who teach courses, that focus on, racism and equity and diversity, and many projects are ongoing. But one of the major projects that focused on anti-racism that we undertook over the last couple of years was establishing a task force on anti-racism. So in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matters movement, many of our faculty and students asked our senior administration as to what we as an institution were doing in light of all the global discussions that were happening at the time. And so after some deliberations, our university president set up a task force on anti-racism. And I was the chair of the task force, and we had a team of 13 members. And we started our work in July 2020, and we completed it in July 2022. Took about 2 years. It's a lot of work, in terms of finding where we were as an institution, what needs to be done, what are our responsibilities as a post-secondary institution. And so finally, we submitted our report, which is nearly 100 pages, with 64 recommendations to the institution. And we launched it officially and publicly in October 2022. So just about how many months, like 7 or 8 months back. And so now we have this robust document with all these recommendations that is an institutional project basically to work on. So this has been one of our major anti-racism initiatives lately.
That's great. And what were the different initiatives you undertook? Like how challenging was this work?
So we did multiple things as the task force. One of the initiatives that we took on was an educational initiative. So we hosted 10 workshops focusing on different aspects of anti-racism, some of it, explaining basic concepts of what is racism, how to be an anti-racist, looking at inclusive communication, understanding the history of anti-Black racism in North America and in Canada in particular, understanding the history of anti-Indigenous racism. So we provided a number of education initiatives for our students and for our employees to get acquainted with how to be part of the dialogue. So that was one of the initiatives. Alongside that, I think a major project that we undertook was a survey. We surveyed all our employees on their experiences of racism within and beyond the institution. And the results of the survey helped us to come up with a number of recommendations that they confirmed, meaning in some ways, all of our post-secondary institutions, they carry legacies of colonization and white supremacy and, in the North American context, settler colonialism. And so our systems and structures are informed by these histories. And the surveys basically confirmed that these histories, they have ongoing legacies and that there is a lot of work that we still need to, accomplish in terms of raising awareness about some of these issues, changing our policies, our, structures, our systems. The other piece that we started, and of course that will take some time, is a policy on anti-racism. So we submitted a draft policy with our report, and work on that will, it will take a couple of more years, but we have submitted a policy draft. So we took a number of, we worked with a number of approaches, did a lot of research, looked at what other institutions were doing, where other institutions were at, the results of the task forces of other post-secondary institutions. So it's a lot of work that we undertook. I think one of the major challenges that we faced was that we did all of this work at the height of the pandemic, which meant that our campuses were closed. We were doing most of the work online. Our consultations, our talking to our students, talking to our employees, all of that was happening remotely. And it is an opportunity in a way as well, because we were able to reach more people, because people were able to join no matter where they were, whether it was attending workshops or whether it was speaking to the members of the task force. And at the same time, we couldn't do some of the things that we would have liked to do in person. For example, say, host focus groups where students could come and talk to us, right, in an intimate environment. We couldn't do some of those things. So that was one of the challenge. And of course, the other challenge is typical when doing any anti-racism work, right, like dealing with fear and ignorance, and where people sometimes are worried about losing privilege, not at times wanting to let go of some of the traditional ways of doing, doing research or like doing academia in general, right? So those are ongoing challenges, I think. But overall, I think that we got really positive response, positive feedback. There is a desire to learn more, to change the systems. And I think that is what keeps us focused and really motivated to continue to do this work.
That's really amazing. And I can really draw on the similarities between the work that you're doing there and some of the stuff that's been going on at NTU and our decoloniality and decolonization initiatives, and how we have Islamophobia Awareness Month happening. It's been going on for a couple of years. But that creating dialogue between staff and students and engaging them and kind of getting everyone to work together to create that safe space within campuses, on campuses and within academic spaces more widely. So how will the recommendations you've discussed be implemented?
So as I mentioned, there are 64 recommendations, and some of these recommendations have sub-recommendations. So we are looking at, more than 70, 80 recommendations when we, put everything together. So obviously this is not going to happen overnight. It's going to be an ongoing project. And again, anti-racism work is always supposed to be ongoing. I mean, there is no end date to this work, right? So that's one thing that we are looking at, some short-term and some long-term implementations. So some of the broader recommendations we made, one of the recommendations was establishment of an Office of Anti-Racism, with position of an AVP anti-racism. And so that has already happened. So when we released the report in October, our institution accepted the report fully, as is, and immediately announced the establishment of an Office of Anti-Racism. So now all of this work is centralized through this office, and the office is in charge of supporting the implementation of these recommendations. Um, and so some of the work that we have already started, for example, we are already embarking on an anti-Indigenous racism action plan in partnership with our Office of Indigenous Initiatives. We are looking at development of a Black Studies program. So that work has already started through our Faculty of Arts, and we are studying a number of Black Studies programs out there, and we are going to start with developing a certificate to start with, and then moving on with a minor and a major within the faculty. All the faculties across the institution are looking into how they will implement some of the recommendations that are in the report. So we are looking at the office kind of, um, supporting the institution, different units, different departments, different faculties. We are again, hosting a range of workshops, as we did when we were doing the work of the task force. So educational initiatives are underway. The work on the policy on anti-racism is already underway. We are looking at, how will we implement this? How do we talk to different parties that will be involved? What are the legal, issues, legal implications of the policy? So there are a number of, departments and different units that we are talking to. So a lot of work has already started. But as I said, this is long-term work. So it will certainly take some time for us to get some of the recommendations implemented, but there are some that we have already got in place, right? So I think the one thing that really excites us right now is, as an institution, KPU is committed to ensuring that we move forward in as an institution committed to anti-racism, right? So we are looking at institution-wide initiatives, institution-wide recommendation, it's the implementation process. So yeah, I think slow and steady. I think we'll get through it.
Yeah, honestly, Asma, that sounds so amazing. And I feel like it's really inspiring to hear on this end, and it gives us kind of an idea of how we could implement similar initiatives in academic spaces in the UK. So thank you very much for sharing that. And I just wonder what are other initiatives at KPU that work towards building inclusive spaces? Maybe you could share a little bit about that.
Sure, yeah. So as I mentioned, there KPU has a number of projects ongoing, and in fact, we have had a number of committees in place. I think since 1990s or late 1980s as well. Pretty much the history of the institution, because we have 40 plus year history here. So one or the other committee has focused on, inclusive initiatives. Currently, we have a number of initiatives. So, for example, the funding, bodies here, the federal funding bodies, which we call the Tri-Council, which funds most of the research initiatives across Canada, is now more and more looking at ensuring that the research teams that the institutions put together, or when you apply for funding, that your research teams are diverse, which has meant that they have mandated what they have called EDI action plan, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion action plan, is mandatory for post-secondary institutions across Canada. And so we are working on that. And as we saw this initiative coming from the Tri-Council, we also saw that as an opportunity at an institutional level. And so we are doing more than what is required by the Tri-Council, and we are working on it on an institutional level to create an EDI action plan, which means that we are looking at equity, diversity issues from a number of angles, and we are coming up that this is still in the works. So a number of recommendations are going to come through this EDI action plan, which will be completed, I think, over the next few months. For a long time, I think more than a decade, we have also had President's Diversity and Equity Committee, which is a committee where the university president chairs the committee, sits on the committee, and this is the high-level committee where people are able to bring issues that need to be taken care of at an institutional level to the attention of the senior leadership. And which also means that senior leadership is very much involved with some of the initiatives. And as part of the what we call PDEC, the President's Diversity and Equity Committee, we have a number of subcommittees as well. One is Pride Advocacy Group, which focuses on the initiatives for to LGBTQAI plus communities. We have a disability inclusion group, which focuses on accessibility and disability rights. And then we also recently established an Office of Indigenous Initiatives as well. There are a number of projects that are happening through the Office of Indigenous Initiatives. We have an AVP position in the office as well. So we are looking at a number of initiatives focusing on indigenization and decolonization. And then we have Climate Plus Challenge, sustainability initiatives. So, when we think about it as an institution, we have a lot going on that focuses on creating equitable, inclusive, sustainable, decolonial spaces, which ensures that, students and employees, they feel welcome, they feel included. And so a lot is happening, and lot still needs to be done, right? Because these are all the areas that require so much work historically. What we are looking at here is, historically marginalized groups, and ensuring that we are working on including and creating safe spaces.
Yeah, of course. And it all sounds so amazing, like from the start to the end. I was so inspired by everything you were sharing, and I'm sure it'll fold out, and the work that you're putting in now is going to pay off as time goes on. But so inspiring. And it's like over here, there's an argument to be viewed that Islamophobia is a form of racism. And at NTU, we've spoken about this before, but we've officially adopted a definition of Islamophobia and have taken steps towards tackling Islamophobia and creating more inclusive and safe spaces for Muslim students on campuses. This includes our NTU Islamophobia Awareness Month, which we've been doing for 2 years now, and are looking forward to our third Islamophobia Awareness Month in November. So Islamophobia Awareness Month, just in case, anybody's not aware of what it is or where it's come from, takes place nationally in the UK every November. And it aims to celebrate positive Muslim contributions in British society, whilst also raising awareness of Islamophobia and how we can tackle it collectively as a society. So at NTU, we've hosted external speakers, we've had NTU researchers do talks, we've held creative workshops and exhibitions, and we've also had student panels with the aim to bring together both students and staff, non-Muslim and Muslim, to create safe spaces for, open discussions, debates, and look at how staff and students can come together at university and tackle Islamophobia and create those safe spaces so that Muslim students feel represented, heard, and involved in the wider NTU community. So I wonder if that's something you have thought about doing at KPU and what you think of that.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing all that information. And I think, it just gives us more ideas about what more we could do at KPU as well. Islamophobia Awareness Month. I think that might be an idea that we might want to, take away from NTU and host something along those lines here as well. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
No problem. Yeah. And considering both KPU's anti-racism initiatives and NTU's Islamophobia Awareness Month, what do you believe differentiates one from the other?
Well, I would say these are overlapping systems of oppression, right? Meaning both of these racism and Islamophobia, and of course Islamophobia as a form of racism. There is plots written about that as well. Like scholars have been arguing this for a long time. But what we are looking at is really systems rooted in ignorance, systems rooted in fear of the other, systems rooted in desire to continue to, I would say, center whiteness and Western knowledge and, Western ways of being. And both of these, they take the roots from these, not only the desire to continue the ongoing colonial practices, but also sometimes not wanting to understand the other enough or spend time and energy to understand communities and people who have been othered historically, right? So I really don't see racism and Islamophobia as different systems. They stem from the same causes, they stem from the same colonial practices. They lead to multiple marginalizations, right? If you are a person of color, you are facing racism. But if you are a person of color and a Muslim, then you are facing both racism and Islamophobia. And then, of course, add multiple layers of marginalization to that. If you add the lens of, sexism and, ableism and number of, other forms of marginalization. Like when you look at it intersectionally, then we know that, these are these are emanating from the same historical structures and systems, right? So they're even in Canada, while there is debate around Islamophobia, I don't think that the debate is intense enough, and that enough work is being done in this area. And recently, in the month of March, in fact, the Prime Minister appointed Amira Al Gawabi as Canada's first special representative on combating Islamophobia. And so we do now have something happening at the national level, and we're hoping that this creation of this position will lead to more discussions about Islamophobia in Canada. But certainly there is more need for this work in our post-secondary institutions as well.
Yeah, amazing. That's great. I just wonder how both initiatives could be used side by side in academic spaces to work towards building trust, equality, and inclusion for students of marginalized backgrounds and identities within universities. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I think universities have a role to play here in terms of within the institution, but outside of the institution as well, right? So within the institution, we could do more to speak to these issues in our classrooms, for example. Right? Bring more awareness in our classrooms. It's not always easy because sometimes like even with some of the anti-racism initiatives or indigenization initiatives, faculty are worried at times about not knowing enough to be able to bring these issues in the classroom, worrying about saying the wrong things. And so what we are doing is also creating a number of training modules for our faculty as well. And so I think we need more of that, even in the context of Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and all these forms of discrimination that we see in our society, whether meaning of course here based in both in race and religion, but all forms of discrimination. I think we have a role to play as post-secondary institutions, ensuring that we speak to this in our classrooms. We make this part of our teaching and learning. We make this part of our research, right? Bring students in. We have some amazing research projects, going on at KPU, where students are involved, where they are able to speak to their own lived experiences. It's very important to take into consideration lived experiences of our, employees and our students. And when we involve students in our research, especially given that, we are an undergraduate institution, and so undergraduate students don't always get opportunities to be involved in research. Whereas because we are an undergraduate institution, it means that we are able to involve our students in research at a very early stage. They don't have to wait until they get to graduate programs. They can be involved in research while they are undergraduate students. So I think we could do some of this work through that, and through knowledge mobilization, right? Being able to disseminate this research not only in traditional academic venues, but in our communities. I think our research and the work that we do needs to be, we need to make communities part of that, and we need to take it back to the communities. Because ultimately, if the work that we do and the research that we do, like traditionally, how universities have been considered ivory towers and elitist institutions, and that's partly because we just talk among ourselves, like we talk among other academics, and when we do that, we fail to take our research beyond academia. And so I think what we are looking at doing more of, and which is also becoming one of the requirements that is also being put forward by our funding bodies as well, in terms of how is your research involving communities? How are you speaking back to the community? So I think that we need to also think about different models of knowledge mobilization beyond publishing in journals and talking at conferences. We need to take this beyond that as well. So Yeah, I guess, I'm probably moving away from your question, but hopefully I'm speaking somewhat to, um, you know, being able to create some of these spaces in
No,
academia.
yeah, I was going there anyway. I was about to ask and just branching off that how you believe academic research can be most effectively adopted in wider society to lead towards a more just society. So how you think everything that you're talking about, how can it then be effectively adopted and translated across into wider society?
Yeah, so I'll speak to some of the work that I do here as a sort of an example. Um, so most of my work focuses on um, looking at literature, film, and media from a postcolonial, decolonial angle, and in that I'm looking at, say, the way writers, filmmakers, visual artists, how are they fostering a just and inclusive societies? How are they bringing up, for example, social justice issues? The way we, the way I'm analyzing this work is looking at the contributions of some of the, Black, Indigenous, and people of color to the discourse of social justice. And I'm finding that one of the ways to do this is to organically build this in academia, right? So invite people of color to speak in your institution, to talk to you about not only necessarily social justice issues only, but about the work they're doing in general, right? Like, for example, like working on a book by Canadian author Uzma Jalaluddin. Her novel Hannah Khan carries on, and I'm completing a paper on that, and it's a romantic comedy. It's a very interesting work, like very engaging, um, way, like easy to get into, kind of fiction, and at the same time, it centers Muslim characters, Islamic communities, and it allows the author to speak to Islamophobia in Canada through the characters, right? So, in some ways, you are reading a romantic comedy, and at the same time, um, as you engage with the characters, you learn so much about the lived experiences of Muslim communities, and of course, I don't want to suggest that fiction is reality in any way. Meaning, of course, but fiction is part of society. It reflects society, and this novel is one example, I think, where we can see how a literary text can create some awareness about some of these issues. Um, and then I'll just speak to two other authors. Like recently, I had a conversation like the one that we are having right now with Farzana Doctor, and we focused mostly on her novel Seven, which speaks to the issue of female genital cutting, and especially in the context of certain South Asian Islamic communities. And again, an issue that isn't necessarily talked about enough, or that people even know about. So um, in North America, or in the Western world generally, we tend to assume that these, like issues such as FGC um, are not issues in the Western world, but they very much are. And so as we Farzana and I talked about her novel, we were able to, speak to so many issues that are rooted in patriarchal structures of society, sexism, and how women's bodies are used, have been used, are, they continue to be used in a way that controls women's bodies, right? And then uh, another example is of Jenna Butler. I hosted Jenna Butler last year, or probably year before last, and Jenna works on issues of climate change, um, and she speaks to how she lives on a farm and how she lives, in a sustainable way, growing food organically, and that allows us to kind of, um, understand again some of the issues around climate change and sustainability. So I think that what we could do as academics and as researchers is to, one way of doing it, of course, given the field that I'm working in, is to showcase these people, their work, to talk to them, to bring into them into the academic space, and ultimately really train our students for activism, because um, the reaction that I get from students after I host some of these authors, it's amazing. They are so excited. They want to do more. They want to learn more, and so I think we have to create these meaningful research spaces for our students, to create opportunities for them, to create opportunities for them to talk to some of the activists, some of the writers, filmmakers, artists, um, because you just never know, what it sparks, and what it leads to. Um, at KPU, our university motto is thought meets action. And so we are a polytechnic university, right? So we have traditional degrees, but we also have beekeeping program, right? So at our institution, I think in some ways I say we have the best of both worlds. Like you can learn postcolonial theory, but you can also learn how to make honey. And I think that's where um, we are able to create these spaces where um, there are opportunities for experiential learning, there are opportunities for activism. Um, and I strongly think that academia and activism, um, they can meet. They can meet within our institutional spaces. That university can do a lot more in fostering social justice dialogues, in ensuring that um, we train the next generation, and that we provide the space um, that we move beyond that traditional image of elitism, right? And it's complex, because universities themselves, uh, they hold all these systems and structures that are colonial, right? And that are rooted um, in discriminatory practices. So we have to work from within as well. We have to work to decolonize the university space itself. So we have to ensure that we are looking at our own policies and our own procedures, and working to change that, while also providing spaces for working with the community, for training students, giving them the tools, the theories, the practical knowledge to do this activist work.
Yeah, that's amazing. I just think a good place to round up would be by asking you why you think it's crucial for academic spaces to encourage this relationship between research and activism.
Universities, or generally speaking, education spaces are spaces for thinking, right? For changing the world for better. So if we don't provide these spaces, then the knowledge that we are generating, it doesn't transform into something, right? Like what we want is transformative spaces, knowledge that that leads to social change, right? It's one thing for us to say study, postcolonial and decolonial theories, but what does it mean? How do these theories become a site for change? And that's where activism comes in, right? Like there is the traditional knowledge that we want to, and historically speaking, that's how changes happen. Like if we look at histories of change, whether you're looking at uh, feminist theories, or you're looking at critical race theories, they have all ultimately led to practical changes. And so it is important, I think, for our institutions to not only be able to impart theoretical knowledge, but be able to create spaces for making those theories practical and taking into consideration lived experiences of marginalized communities, and leading to that change that comes out of the knowledge of lived experience as well.
I 100% agree with you. I think that's really powerful, and it's very true to how we take what we learn through our education and through these structures, and how we implement that as individuals in the wider community. And I think in doing that and creating that bridge, and by using our research more widely in the way that you've spoken during our discussion, is all part of that. I think that's where we'd like to see the future going with this, right? But I'd just like to thank you, Asma, for sharing your time and contributing so graciously to tonight's discussion. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Bonington Gallery and Alex, who's been amazing behind the scenes tonight. And finally, to our audience for joining us. We'll see you at the next Formations event. Have a great evening. Goodbye.
Thank you.